Hello, everybody. So it's a pleasure to be here to have this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, we're gonna talk about all sorts of things, from how these leaders are thinking about AI, how their clients are thinking about AI, how our society should be thinking about AI. But maybe we could just step back and figure out where we are, Arvind, in this journey toward our AI future, which is going to dominate.
I'll begin with maybe a sports analogy, a baseball analogy. So the game has started. AI is kind of in the first innings of the game. Hard to say exactly where it'll go, but the game is on, players are on the field, everybody's having fun. Just to put a contrast, I would say cloud is probably in the fifth or sixth innings, so you got a pretty good idea of what's going on. And some other emerging technologies, I would call it, are still in the, maybe not even minor leagues, maybe graduating high school and getting on onto the minor leagues. So if it's in the first innings, you got to have your team ready. You got to be ready to go. And so what is every enterprise doing to prepare? What are their use cases? I don't think this is a question of if, which some people wonder about. This is now a when. That's kind of how I would put it, and that's the conversations all of our clients are having with us, is how do we scale? Which are the few things that should matter? How do I get my teams motivated? What stack should I use? Those are sort of the questions that are going on.
So first inning, and what did you say, cloud is fifth or sixth inning?
Yes.
Okay, Thomas Kurian is here, head of Google Cloud. Do you agree with that statement on both?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Yes, I do.
Where's Google on its journey toward our AI future?
You know, we at Google have been working on AI for a long time. We first introduced it into our products about 13 years ago, and we have broadened it across the entire portfolio. When you use search, for example, you don't realize that behind search sits a model. When you use YouTube, there's models that put the right videos in front of you. So there's work that we've been doing for many, many years. Over the last 3 years, we have significantly expanded our work in 3 different ways. Number one is building a world-class, state-of-the-art set of models that take the capability of AI from what was traditionally called machine learning into a new way of using models called generative AI, where the models actually generate information. When we did that, we wanted to have it represent the way that people thought. So the way that people process information, you process text and images and sound and videos all at the same time. So we put that in, and we've now started incorporating it in 2 different ways. One is in our products and services, and also within our company to make our organization use these tools to operate more efficiently.
Janet, you're the new-ish CEO of EY. How big of a part of what you're doing now for clients is generative AI?
It's a big part, and it's going to continue to be a focus area of investment for us. And Sarah, I look at it, we need to look at ourselves, and we need to train our almost 400,000 people, right? And we look at it from our clients' perspective as well. We have a billion, plus pipeline that's been growing and developing. But what I'm really encouraged to see is the conversation has been shifting a little bit from productivity gains, like when we were in Davos in January, I think we were talking about jobs and productivity, and now we're looking at the growth opportunities. And for an organization like ours in professional services, where companies are looking towards us for trust and confidence in the tools that they're developing, I think there's a huge opportunity for us to be working with our clients to really build confidence in the tools, trust in the tools when they're being deployed at a larger scale. And I agree with Arvind. I look at our clients, 80% of them are doing use cases right now, but we're seeing 20% that are doing deployment and pilots at a larger scale. I would say where there's broad opportunities, lower risk, we're seeing more of the pilots being deployed, and we're going to continue to see that pivot from use cases to pilots, and that's what I'm most excited about.
Okay, we'll talk about that. But Greg, I would love to know what you're doing at Motorola Solutions on the use cases front.
Sure. Well, what we do at Motorola Solutions is public safety and physical security, so we connect those in need with those who can provide help. And AI writ large, both descriptive and generative, does play a consequential role in what we're doing. As an example, and we'll get into this discussion about reskilling and jobs, but public safety officials are maxed out and taxed. First responders, police officers, staffing levels still haven't returned to where they were pre-COVID. 911 dispatchers are really taxed. The average tenure of a 911 dispatcher has gone from 7 years to 4 years. They need this help. So kind of the way, Sarah, we're deploying AI, I guess metaphorically, we're not using AI to find a needle in a haystack. We're using AI to remove the haystack and find the needle. And in public safety, that means a lost child, an Amber Alert, a stolen vehicle, a perimeter breach, in the case of a school, a brandished weapon or an active shooter. So we're using all of our technologies, video security, access control, emergency communications, and 911 call handling and dispatch to provide that ecosystem to protect people, property, and places.
Can you already do that?
We're doing that now. By the way, I do want to give just a shout out to Thomas at Google. We use all 3 cloud providers. We use Microsoft for public safety today because of their CGIS compliance. We use AWS a little bit for internal IT, and they came with some of the acquisitions, but we recently did a larger deal with Google on Google Cloud. The thing that excites me about Google is, and we talk about AI and the arms dealers and the cloud providers that Arvind referenced, but Google has an unrivaled set of assets that I think I'm excited about partnering with Thomas and his team, because when I think about cloud, descriptive AI, generative AI, Gemini, and then as Google moves down combining search with generative AI, I think the capacity and capability of Google is pretty substantial.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, Thomas. How you differentiate yourself versus the other 2 he mentioned, Amazon and Microsoft, in terms of your services, what your competitive edge is. There have been questions about where Google is in the AI race and whether the risk is cannibalizing your main business, which is search.
So I think the question on search and generative AI has been going on for a long time. I think we took some time to let our user base actually show what the results are. Search was used to answer very specific questions, like find me the result of a game that finished yesterday. Most people were not asking search more complex questions. And when I say, help me plan a trip, as we added AI with our new search generative experience, we've seen people actually asking search many more questions than they would do before, because the AI is able to have a conversation with the user to understand their intent and process a much more complex question. We've also said that we've seen, because of the better engagement, better conversion as well. So while a lot of people were worried about will AI disrupt search, we've actually found that AI brings more people to ask questions to search, and it's also driving better conversion. With regard to where we've been focused on, our focus has been on 3 primary things. In the end, we've always felt that if AI was really going to be transformative, it needed to have all the skills and think and process information the way that humans do, or better than humans do. And so one of the key things we always thought about was people process information of all modalities, video, audio, all of it at the same time. To just talk about an example, when you think about public safety, you may hear an audio and process a video at the same time, exactly. And that has implications on what may be a dangerous action. So one difference is the way that we process information. We're also able to process a lot of information at the same time. There's been a boundary in technology about how much context can you give an AI system, and recently we're allowed to process over an hour of video at one shot, or 70,000 pages of information, which is a lot of information at one time, so the model can reason much more effectively. So one big difference is how we approach the notion of AI and what skills we're trying to give the model. Second thing, we've also said we need, enterprises are by their nature heterogeneous. People, as they shift, as you said, from idea, use case, to proof of concept, to deploying it, they want a choice of models, not just Google. So we've had an open platform allowing organizations to choose and integrate us into their enterprise. So that's a lot of what we've been focused on at Google.
Where does IBM fit in all the choices that Greg has in terms of services to provide him generative AI?
Yeah, so our approach is quite different than Google's, and that is very purposeful and intentional. So we view ourselves as complementary as opposed to oppositional.
Right.
What we do is we build AI that's good for the enterprise. Our clients care a lot about where they want choice on where to deploy. For companies that are based outside the United States, sovereignty comes into play. For people inside, they may care deeply about what data is contained and which data is being used to both train and deploy on a model. So a number of our clients care about that. You sort of wonder, what are you sort of talking about? So if you think about people in the financial industry, those with their own unique data sets on how they do trading and capital markets, they might care about it. You look at somebody who's worried about a regulator and what data is being used to create regulatory reports. So they care deeply about deploying models inside. So we are building models, and we also agree that open source models play a role here. We bring those as well. But we build models that are sort of fit for purpose for these use cases. Now, for that use case, they have to be as good as the best models out there. But if you can make them fit for purpose and make them, I'll call them reasonably sized, then an enterprise can deploy them inside at much, much lower cost and get what they want. And because data, in a sense, is IP, how do you use your own data if you're an enterprise to add skills to a model is a topic that we worry deeply about, and give them the capability that they can keep those extra skills and the data completely to themselves, so there is no IP leakage. That's kind of the world that we are playing in, and we are finding that there's a lot of interest in those. But I call it's an and to what Thomas described. It's not an or.
Right. So none of you are competitors on stage. Everybody's friends. So Janet, you mentioned what are some of the best use cases and the best pilots that you can cite for your clients?
There's a lot of them, and I think the ones that I'm most encouraged by are in healthcare. Those were the ones that really I think have the ability to change lives, as long as there's trust in that. And I was just with a bunch of CIOs at a course up at Harvard about a week ago, and we were talking about when you look at the Edelman trust index, 35% of people polled don't trust it at all, 30% are all in, and then everybody else is somewhere in the middle. It's all over the place. And the use cases, if you talk to the CIOs, they just have to be marginally better than what we have and what is the familiar, but we're demanding them to be, perfect. If you look at X-rays, what if I told you that when you review X-rays, there's a 15%, inaccuracy rate? And with AI, it can be down to 1%. So the ones that, again, the use cases, we are just up against this familiarity bias that we all have, and I think that we'll see more and more when we really level set out, what do we have today? Is it that good? And can AI be, marginally, or extremely better? And I think that's what we have to really focus on. So those are the areas that I'm most excited where we're changing lives, where you have the ability to look at medical records and have predictions of where people are going to be sick and where you can intervene. So that's great. Then I also get excited about use cases where there's wide scale. We've seen it with call centers, where we can really upskill our employees and get rid of the mundane tasks. And then the last thing, which I'm excited about, we just had a shipping company that's using AI to negotiate with their vendors. We're actually piloting that ourselves at EY. We negotiate lots of vendors. So that's a couple areas that I'm excited about, but there's new ones every day, Sarah, and every single sector. I get to travel around the globe, and we continue to see new cases, and it's more complex than ever before. What I go back to this whole trust and some of the things that we have to be worried about. In the financial world, we're not seeing live deployment. We're seeing it in FP&A and more about forecasting in the future. And I think people are a little bit slower to move there. I come from a financial services background. We talked about models and the regulators. They're not changing the expectations of our clients, and that's where you have to be really particular and careful. And so I think that's where we're going to see people go a little slower.
So how do we deal with the trust issue? Is it just that the technology is not there yet for us to fully trust it? I mean, anybody.
So let me give you a public safety example, and piggybacking on what was said about kind of using AI to incorporate all modalities, voice, text, and video. Picking video for a minute, Sarah. The old paradigm was somebody would sit in an emergency communication center or a 911 center and look at a screen of eye candy, a screen of TVs. And the human was detecting what was wrong or what was an anomaly or a criminal situation in the video. With AI, the proposition is inverted. Video detects and informs you. NASA did a study a few years ago that said, if any individual, any human is looking at video, after 20 minutes, and if there's an anomaly, an instance, a situation, a criminal occurrence, the viewer has a 5% chance of seeing it. So given that, we're using AI, descriptive AI, to detect the perimeter breach, to detect an anomaly, to detect a stolen vehicle. And to your point about trust, AI is augmenting and speeding things up descriptively with amazing algorithms and speed, but it is not acting alone. So in the case of public safety, if there's an incident, that AI is notifying either an enterprise security operations individual or a police officer or a 911 dispatcher. And in that trust chain, he or she is verifying what they see and verifying what action needs to be taken. It's not automated by a machine learning algorithm, so the trust is enhanced by a human in the loop, and I think that's important. On the video side, in terms of evidentiary management, we just introduced real-time redaction and privacy blurring. So if body-worn camera is videoing an incident, a traffic stop, it's immediately blurring and disregarding the privacy of individuals in that situation that are not affected by that crime, which also builds trust. And from a productivity standpoint, when evidence needs to be created for the case, a first responder today is going through voluminous amounts of data. Today, now, with privacy blurring and redaction, we could do it 10 to 15 times faster. But the technology needs to be accurate, a human is in the loop, and you build that trust chain.
Is the technology accurate, Arvind?
I think that for a lot of use cases, the technology is quite accurate. I think for what Greg just described, first of all, we saw the same studies, 20 minutes, maybe actually generous sometimes.
Exactly.
For how accurate this thing are. If humans are 90% accurate, the technology may be 95. It's not 100. So I think this is where there's a lot of hype that goes on. It's not 100%. Well, neither are humans.
Exactly.
So
I'm surprised humans are as high as 90.
it depends on the use cases. I think 80 to 90 is where humans are. By the way, including verbal speech, humans are only good at recollecting about 80%, and they're convinced they heard the other 20, which they may or may not have in recollection. But to get to the question of trust, I think first what Greg described is sort of a process whereby you achieve trust in a particular use case. But there's two other elements of trust that come up that are quite important. One that comes up is, can you tell me that your model is making accurate conclusions and so on? Now that is going to be in the eyes of the beholder, because any AI model can make wrong. So how do you triangulate? How do you get to accuracy in the use cases you care about? The more tighter you constrain the task, the more likelihood you are to get up into those. Did you do enough testing, enough red teaming to know that you're well into the 90s? And then if the risk is not a massive physical risk, you can live within the 90s of accuracy. And the final element of trust is around, are you stepping on anybody else's copyright? This is a big issue. Technologists are not going to decide this. This is going to get decided in regulation, and most likely, I think, in legislation or the courts, in terms of what data, what is fair use, and what is not fair use. So I think that those are two additional issues of trust that play into at least the corporate sensibility around how to deploy all this.
Thomas, how do you think about the trust factor and how we get there?
We're working on a variety of things. I think it's a combination of three elements. We work with governments who are very keen on how we evolve the technology in a responsible way. One example is when you create images, in many countries, they're not if they were generated by a model, they're not copyrightable. And so people often ask us, how can you verify if something was generated by a model or a photograph taken by a person? So we've introduced technology there to allow you to actually verify whether something was an output of a model or something was created by a human. So that's one example, working with governments and policymakers to invent technology to support improving trust in the output of models. The second is providing tools for people when they use a model to answer a question. Often they want to understand what is it that was the basis of how did the model actually generate that answer. And while a model can be very complex, you can ask it to do things like compare the answer to well-known sources to verify it, identify the source from which it derived a big part of the answer, and have it provide a citation, similar to when you read an academic paper, you have citations to show you where it's from. So that's new capability in the industry. It's called grounding, and it allows you to verify and compare your answers so that you get a confidence level. It can be grounded against the entire internet, or it can be grounded against your own data. And citations provide an additional degree of confidence. Third, we're also working on technology at the core of the model to ensure that models have a number of capabilities that people want. Today's generation of models are what are called generative, meaning by definition, they are designed to be creative. They are not, as a result, designed to be, mathematically constrained in the way, when I say mathematically constrained, if you're doing a credit score and you give a model a set of inputs about a person, you want the model to always come back with the exact same answer. That's based on a different kind of algorithm. Today's models, what they call the generative models, were not designed for that purpose. But there are additional types of models that we're working on to allow organizations to use the right type of model for the right scenario. And over time, I think you'll see models evolving to provide a range of skills, from planning, for example, to being able to do mathematical operations. We call that reasoning. These are all things we do, and we have a large team working on trust and safety. And when I say trust and safety, if you use the platform, you don't want to have, for example, a generative model that may either be non-safe, and when I say not safe, for example, violent images, pornography, things of that nature. We also want it to be culturally appropriate. What you want in different parts of the world when you ask a model a question may be different in different parts of the world, not just language-wise, but even images that you show. If you search for a dress in India, where I'm from, you would want to see something different than if you search for a dress here in the United States. So there's a lot of additional controls we're also working on to ensure you can use models and use them in a trustworthy fashion.
Is regulation of AI, government, a good thing or a bad thing? Is it necessary here to build this trust, or will it harm us and make us like Europe, where there's no really big successful AI companies?
We've said the right kind of regulation makes sense. We are in discussions with many, many governments in almost every part of the world on the types of things that are needed. And we've always said publicly that we welcome regulation, and we're working on technology to support it as it comes to be.
Could I jump in here? Look, I think regulation, if you take it as a black and white statement, of course you have to agree with Thomas. I mean, regulation is going to be needed. It's too important to technology. Anything so important to our future is going to have some constraints around it. Now, that said, if you over-regulate, you completely inhibit innovation, you inhibit competition, and you mentioned one continent, but there's other examples where you can see that play out in a terrible way for overall economic progress and societal progress. And by the way, economic growth and employment and. So over-regulation, I think, is almost as bad or maybe worse than under-regulation. Now, when things are early, you probably want to have a lighter touch with the option that you can go back in and discover. Also, people want to put their hands on the actual technology. I strongly urge governments not to regulate the technology, regulate the use cases, regulate how it's going to get deployed, regulate accountability, as opposed to the speed of the technology itself.
Like what? Like the IP thing?
So when I say use case, you can say, if you're trying to make a determination, as the example Greg pointed to, if it's a human in the loop, that's much lower risk. If you let it autonomously take an 18-wheeler and say, go down the highway and you pick the speed, that may be a little too risky today.
By the way, I completely agree with what you said and both of these guys as well. Europe is one thing. If you take a step back, and we can argue whether AI is good or bad, I'm excited by it, not just coincidentally because of this panel, but the transformative nature of what can be done cross-industry is gigantic. And when I think about regulation, the White House has started this AI security initiative, which we are a member and others are too, which looks at the efficacy of these large language models to see, can they be further defined, how can they be further improved, but not mandating, to Arvind's point, how. The second thing is around trust. We are a member of the Coalition of Content Provenance and Authenticity with Adobe, with IBM, with Google, and others. And that is an initiative that looks at deep fakes. Just like you avoid counterfeiting with bills, how do you avoid counterfeiting or deep fakes or fake images? And we are watermarking our content in video. We will watermark our content in audio.
Shouldn't everybody do that?
I think so, but yeah, I think so. But we have a higher standard because we're delivering for public safety. So if we clip a video that we looked at and it's used for evidentiary purposes, it darn well better be accurate, and we have to prove that appropriately through a watermark. So in addition to regulation or lightweight regulation, there's other things we can do working with each other to ensure efficacy and high reliability. The other thing is AI. The United States spent 9 times more on AI investment than China last year. Google, Microsoft, AWS, AMD, NVIDIA, Anthropic. We, this country, have assets in hardware, infrastructure, processing, data centers. We need to maintain that lead, use it responsibly, but it's an exciting time in my view.
I don't know, Jenna. I mean, they never figured out how to regulate social media. This is a technology that is really hard to understand and really hard to see the future, even from some of the top experts in the entire industry. So how on earth are they going to get the right balance here on regulation?
Look, I think it's about principles, right? Because the technology is going to move faster than the regulation. We've seen that, before, and that's what they've really been focused on. If we go back to the concept of trust that we were talking here, we're seeing a lot of our clients spend money not only on AI, but on data management. And I think the data part of the conversation we're not talking about, because you want to talk about trust, you want to talk about bias in data and things like that, Sarah. I think that's a big piece of it too. And I think making sure that the data is right, that the data is, fulsome, right? You talk about the different businesses, the different countries that you're operating and things like that. That's important as well. So good data in, using these tools is going to be really important. And we're going to have to really have principles on that as well. But I think, again, regulation is going to be hard, but we're going to have principles that are going to be used. Again, the technology is, going to be advancing more so than regulatory.
The input, the data.
The input that we're using.
So how do you do that?
You got to make sure you know where your data is coming from. You have to know where it's protected from. You have to make sure that it's fulsome classes of information, that you're not just, that it's got the entire population. In my other life, I work, obviously with EY, but I work in a nonprofit about financial inclusion, and we have so much more data about certain populations than others, and we have to make sure that it's fulsome and that we're making decisions on fulsome data so there's not bias and mistrust in the system.
The other example is we use OpenAI for software development through GitHub Copilot. We have 1,100 software engineers using it. How do we protect ourselves against it? It's a private sandbox established by Microsoft. It's partitioned. We, management, govern who can use it, who can access it, because you don't want unintended consequences of IPR leakage or source code as developers try to iterate with a tool to make a certain software code or product better. So we're taking precautions inside the firm. We're using ChatGPT a little bit for internal use outside of development. We have a front-end portal that tracks who's using it, how long they're on it, what they used it for. So there's a responsibility outside of the government for whether we're doing it the appropriate way too.
I think that's a really important point. You look at our 400,000 people around the globe, there's certain parts of our business that we're blocking the ability to use it because they have sensitive information,
Yes.
client data that's very sensitive, and others that we are more open. And I think that's incredibly important. We've also developed our own large language model, so that's giving our people the opportunity to play with it, experiment with it in the safety of our four walls, I would say, which is really important as well. And we know that we're going to have to open it up and work with other partners in the ecosystem, but for all the data that we have at EY, it's incredible. Being able to have our model get smarter every single day. We're up to 25 million prompts, I think, when I looked yesterday. To give our people the touch and feel and ability to experiment is really important. But there's certain parts of our business that we're really, have it a little bit more locked down than others, and out of necessity. And I think that's a big responsibility that we have as organizations.
So could I just maybe build a little bit on what Janet just talked about? Look, AI in the end is a representation of the underlying data. So if your data has biases or incompletions in it, the AI you produce will have those incompletions and biases in it. So it's really important to understand what is that data, run all kinds of fairness, and I'll use that word generally in the English sense of the word, to make sure that your data itself is fair. If it's not fair, there are known techniques in computer science to go ahead and either complete the data or to take the underlying biases out of it and then be transparent in describing that. In financial, you make a credit decisions. We know if you look at 30-year-old mortgage data, certain populations are much less represented in it. It's not just in images where it's pretty clear that dark-skinned people tend to be less common in the underlying training sets. But if you take mortgage data, certain ethnicities, certain zip codes are going to be less. So should the AI conclude if you're from that zip code, we should deny it because there are just fewer people who got approval? Because that is what AI could conclude. So you got to test against those things. And that, whether you call it data management or you call it your red teaming, whatever you want to call it, is really important as we begin to go forward.
Well, I mean, not to pick on you, Thomas, but I think of the example of the African-American founding fathers that Google AI came up with, and I feel like it's relevant here, a teachable moment.
It's a good question. First of all, 2 points there. I think there's a lot of confusion on what the issue was about. The issue was about a very simple thing. When you ask the model for a particular, like, show me a senator from 1864, the model was generating images of people rather than taking 1864 as a fact. So that's an enhancement we made to the model to look at exact dates and not generate an answer because that's just a historical question, and treat it more like a look up the fact from a historical repository and provide that. So that was one change we made. The other change was there was a defect in one of our classifiers that when you gave it an answer, it was not representing things. So human beings who were testing it were giving it feedback saying, you're not being representative enough. Somebody then fixed the defect, and then it seemed like it had over-rotated. That's also been fixed. But the reality is we have thousands, millions of users using this. It was reported by a small number of people, and part of the reason is our controls, safety controls that we give enterprise customers have protected against all of these scenarios. And so we learned both how to enhance the model by making it understand facts better, like dates. We learned how to have it have better classifiers when it's facing the consumer world. But then most importantly, the fact that we had those controls on the enterprise side protected. We didn't have a single report of it from any of our thousands of corporate customers who use the model.
Sticking with trust, I know we've talked a lot about trust in the technology, but how about trust for society? Because there's this narrative, Janet, that AI is coming for your job and is going to kill us and is going to
Everything
be
in
this very
between.
dangerous, harmful thing. You've said a few times you have 400,000 employees. Do you need 400,000 employees in a world where generative AI is doing a lot of the functionality?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and we know some things now, and we'll get smarter as we go. I told you back in January we're focused on productivity. We're trying to measure that. It's still early days, but again, I think our young people were doing the same things that they did today that when I started my job 30 years ago, and I think there's a huge opportunity to upskill our people, have them doing more interesting things earlier on in their career, and learning new skills. And I think the conversation for us has shifted from productivity gains to really what are the growth opportunities in our organization. I went back to trust, confidence. Our clients look to us with our brand, and the work that we do, and I think there's a huge opportunity. We're now pivoting the conversation to growth. Now, we're about a $50 billion organization. I think we're going to be able to grow, the next $50 billion, with less than, the growth in the talent that we've seen over the last 10 years when we doubled. But I think that's still a lot to be determined. Now, look, our people are demanding. We are also offering a challenger model to our own businesses. We look at what we're doing for our clients, what we're doing for ourselves, and what we're doing for good. But I really think the conversation's been shifting. I think the IMF said 40% of the jobs, when we were in Davos together, 40% of the jobs were going to be eliminated. Now it's more about productivity, and now it's pivoting towards growth and opportunity and growth in GDP.
Arvind, you have very strong views on this, I know.
I do. Look, we have what, 3.9% unemployment? If I look at the projections and the demographics, our birth rate is below substitution rates. That's not just true here. You can go through Japan, China, UK, Italy, Spain, France, Germany. You can go over the bulk of the developed world, and we're not going to have enough people. So we need digital workers to augment human workers. That's not a replacement, that's augmenting, and that is extremely critical, so humans can do the work that is the most valuable. Look, when it comes to human interaction, you're not going to have that replaced by AI, but could AI complete the form for you? Could it do something clerical? Could it talk about the matching? In Greg's example, could it look at the video and tell you, go focus on that 1 minute, not on scanning 2 hours at very high speed, looking for that thing? I think that this is where AI is going to be incredibly useful. Is it going to take away some really low-order, white-collar cognitive work? It probably will. But there is so much demand for people to do other that is where I don't think there is going to be displacement. But it is going to be an augmentation to human work. And I feel really strongly about it. By the way, I agree with Janet's point. As we get the next $10 billion or $1 billion, maybe the number of humans we need is less proportionately than what we had before. And that is going to be critical. Otherwise, businesses are not going to be able to scale. And we need growth. We all want economic prosperity. I think every single country, every single company wants economic prosperity. And so these are tools. Much like, by the way, this would be like debating that let's not have a steam engine, let's not have a jet engine.
That's right.
Oh my God, we're going to remove humans who are pulling things, and we're going to, by the way, if you look at those old pictures, humans pull the carts on rails, or we had horses pulling those things, that we don't want to replace the motive power of those things by machines. It seems very much like that argument today. Instead, we manufacture a lot more because we have machines to provide power.
And by the way, if I could just add real quickly,
That makes me feel better.
you talked about AI killing jobs or killing people. Let me
Yeah.
give you the flip example. Today in the States, if we're able to reduce response time to a 911 call by 1 minute,
Save lives.
it saves 10,000 lives, 1 minute. So what are we doing? Well, 2 things come to mind when you call in a 911 center here in the States: translation and transcription. So you think of an urgent situation, domestic abuse, whatever it may be, and a 911 caller is speaking Spanish to a 911 dispatcher or call handler that doesn't know Spanish. In real time, we've got generative AI converting Spanish to English so they don't miss a beat in responding. In addition to that, in the old way, the 911 call taker would be entering in what he or she hears the caller, your address. With generative AI, it's populating it automatically. That reduces response time. That's just on 911 translation and transcription. It'll make us safer. There's other issues, but it's real and impactful in public safety.
Do you have to hire fewer people? Because you're an AI-forward organization. And
I
you're
would
using
say
it.
no, because even though Janet and Arvind have talked about efficiencies and will it cut some jobs, sure. But we're using, as an example, we're using GitHub on the developer side. We're finding that 20% of the code is being written faster. That doesn't want me to cut jobs. That wants me to produce more product and differentiation. Customer service times are down using automated chatbots. I don't want to cut people. I don't want to improve our customer service levels. So our focus is effectiveness and engagement, efficiency later. We're thinking about, to Janet's point, we're thinking about growth.
So 2 related questions here from the audience. Please keep them coming, and thank you. Attendee number 64 asks, how can we collaborate to develop public uses for AI? And just as a related question, someone else is asking, how can we work with local governments to demonstrate use cases and solve pressing issues? We've been talking a lot about the private sector, but it's a good topic.
So one thing comes to mind, and the notion of what's called real-time crime centers. And that is the idea of linking public safety and the services that first responders provide with private businesses. And how do you exchange information, perhaps it's video, in a way that links private businesses into the ecosystem for public safety response for a public-private partnership. Those things are going on right now. As a sidelight issue, Yonkers, New York, and I just heard this a few days ago, has one of our real-time crime centers. And there was a 911 call about a missing autistic child. And once that description was put out of the child, using AI, descriptive and generative, they found that child in 13 minutes. There are so many use cases where the private sector can work with public safety or the government around other use cases to save lives and improve delivery.
Anybody else have other ideas?
Yeah, I think, look, there's a couple of ways to go about it. You can take topics. So another important topic that many of us care about is sustainability. So can we set up competitions, not for immediate commercial use, that people can go ahead, develop applications, try out use cases, and go forward? Food safety, sustainability. We can actually think about public health responses. And I think the onus is upon companies like us, and we do many of them, where you say, here is a platform, here's a use case, let's have thousands of teams compete, the best few, we're going to try to help get you funded and get you moving forward. And those are things to build excitement and to build awareness on the technologies. But on the first part of your question, I do want to jump in. I think that open source is a really important way to let people play around, innovate on the technologies without getting constrained by IP. Look, as a company, we have plenty of proprietary code, we have plenty of open source code. But open source is a way that people can tap into it, and if you have the right license, then it doesn't need to come back to us. It is simply a way to have innovation flourish, and I think if you can get the world to innovate, you get much better ideas overall than if you're constrained where the innovation lies.
Thomas,
really
open
good point.
source? Yes or no?
We took the same technology on which we built our Gemini model, and we built an open source version of that called Gemma. We also have a coding version of that to help software engineers write code called CodeGemma, and we made them available. They're incredibly popular, and it was a signal of our commitment not just to build our own models, but also to make open source available. We've also made open source, we've done a lot of work with many different open source companies helping optimize their models, because one of the challenges people have historically worried about is, once I put a model into open source, can I continue to optimize it from a performance and cost efficiency point of view? And we do that with a number of them as well. So we're doing a variety of these things.
Are you working at all with local governments to solve issues, or we're not there yet?
We do work with local governments on a variety of things. Broad brush, I would say we work with them in 4 areas. 1, digitizing citizen services. You know, many of you apply for driver's licenses, things of that nature. Many of those are complicated. If you're a person who speaks a foreign language, it's even harder. And so we've helped a number of the permitting, licensing agencies to bring their solutions their services through our digital platforms to citizens in their state. Second example, during the pandemic and subsequently, there were many states that were bottlenecked on issuing small business loans and things of that nature. And part of the reason they were bottlenecked was their call centers were bottlenecked, and they didn't have enough credit officers to actually review and score and approve. So we worked with a number of states. Wisconsin is public about the work we did with them to use our AI tools to automate the whole small business loan approval lending process. And that's an example of something where it didn't displace any jobs. It was actually helping citizens in the state. Third, we've done a number of things, not just in the United States, but also overseas in healthcare. And when I say in healthcare, think of a simple example. You go to a doctor, and this is an example we've done with a number of hospitals around the world. You go to a doctor, you get diagnosed with a disease. Just hypothetically, you get told you have a certain kind of cancer. Once you leave the primary care or the tertiary care center, there's not a lot of information that you have about what to do, what to follow, etc. And calling your doctor's office is a good thing, but often they are bottlenecked too and may not have the ability to support you. So with a number of nonprofits, as well as with hospital systems and local governments, we built something called a nurse navigator. Nurse navigator is it helps you find information about your disease based on your record. It allows your doctor to approve, okay, follow these instructions, and it actually serves as a question and answer system for people who want care, particularly in rural areas where often access to care is challenged. So these are examples of things, real projects we're doing with local governments, applying AI to practical solutions and problems that they have.
It was interesting. I saw a study that said in some of those cases, people felt that there was more empathy coming from AI than from their own healthcare practitioners. So, interesting.
That says something about the healthcare practitioners, I guess. What about you, Jenna? Do you work with local governments at all, or do you ever think to yourself, wow, this government could really use a little AI upgrade?
Early days, but again, I think there's a tremendous opportunity. I go back to, the more that people are using this technology, our young people coming up with ideas to make things better, I think we'll all benefit from that.
One thing we haven't talked about is AI infrastructure and just what that's going to look like. I mean, Thomas, how much is Google spending a quarter? 12 billion or so? On what?
To run AI systems, you have to have data centers, you need networks that connect all these data centers and machines together, and you need very high performance systems for both training and what they call inferencing or serving up models. We at Google have been doing that for many, many years, and as our needs for AI grew, we continue to invest in them, and there are many, many things that we're doing to both make models work more efficiently, but also make them much more, cost efficient. So examples of things, many of you have heard of something called Moore's Law. Moore's Law is what governed the last cycle of optimization in computing technology. It delivered what used to be a supercomputer in your pocket, from the 1970s, as a smartphone in your pocket today. Now, the thing with Moore's Law is every advance required a new generation of silicon, and silicon requires process changes, etc. Now with AI, a lot of that is being done in the software. So the optimizations are coming much, much faster. One example is we made our models run on a smartphone. And if you've ever tried to run something on a smartphone where people complain about you taking up battery life, etc., it really required you to think differently about the kind of constraints we put around the model. So that's one, in order to run models well, you need global infrastructure. That's been a core competency of Google for many, many years. When you click on search or watch a YouTube video, obviously we know how to run those things. And so AI is just the next advance on how we think of our global infrastructure.
Arvind, what needs to be built out to have the kind of AI infrastructure that we need? Who's going to build it, and how quickly does that get done?
So look, you mentioned one, right? I mean, like, I think all the large cloud providers are going to be spending money on building out AI infrastructure. That's one side of it. But then there is the other, whether you want to call it, is it 80% or is it 50%? People are going to want to run AI at the edge, be it at a first responder, to use many of Greg's examples, but think about factory flows, think about home healthcare. There's going to be a tremendous amount of AI at the edge there. It's not just a smartphone. It's going to be in embedded devices. It's got to run there. The models have to run there. There's got to be a lot of work. I mean, a few examples have been mentioned on how to optimize, but does the model need to be big, or can it be made smaller? Can you quantize it? What is the underlying hardware? I actually think there is 100, maybe 1,000 times advantage to be gotten on how you run models leveraging current generation semiconductor technology. So not going off into sort of 5 to 10 years, but into 1 and 2 years, I think there is that much to be gotten. Then other than sort of how to make the semiconductor technology more efficient and models smaller, there is a world of very large models, but that is because they have to do a very vast variety of things. There is also going to be a world of much more specific purpose models, and those are going to be more constrained. By the way, along with that will usually come more accuracy, less hallucination, less pure creative and generative power, but much more fit for purpose. I think both those put together is going to drive a huge amount of efficiency and remove the onus on the pure power, et cetera. All that said, we do certainly need some people to invest in the large centers, so that's where you can go ahead and train the models, because that's kind of where the training is going to happen for the base, but the deployment in the end should be 100 to 1,000 times more, and that is where all the other pieces are going to take hold.
You know, Arvind brings up a really good point on edge cases. What we're doing at Motorola Solutions is working to protect you, communities, and kids. We talked about local government partnerships. We're working with local school systems, because what we're doing is solving for safer. Solving because we're always innovating, and safer because threats are always evolving, and so are we. And one of the most important areas is our kids in safe schools. We can put in an edge system on video, access control, and communications to have a video. By the way, the majority of active shooter situations are a person with a non-hidden weapon. It's a brandished rifle. It's not detected. You can then automatically shut doors and access. You can integrate with school blueprints, so you know where the shooter is and you know access and egress. And Sarah, now we have sensors, and when you're working all on the edge with this tied together, if there's an active shooter, the police want to know where they are. Sometimes you hear they have to go room by room. If you have the integrated ecosystem with blueprints, and you've got first responders connected with situational awareness with video, we could actually, during an active shooter, with sensors, light a green path, a physical green path, a light to safety. We can do that now. We don't need cloud. We could put it right on the edge. It's a great point.
So in the final moments that we have left, I would love it feels like a lot is happening, a prediction from each of you for what to watch within generative AI, whether it's a use case or a debate or just something that we need to be focusing on and smarter about as we try to figure out this technology and how to best interact with it in the next year. And we can talk about it again next year, hopefully. Janet.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that question, Sarah, and this is something we haven't talked about. I do worry. We talk a lot about AI and, you know, taking over, replacing IQ, and as a leader, I think a lot about EQ, and I think that's just as important. And from a leadership perspective, we really need to be focused on that. That's not going to replace the emotional intelligence that we have to have as leaders at all parts of our career, and that's what I think we really have to be talking about as well, that balance, you know, every day between using AI, but making sure that...
Can you program AI to have EQ?
I haven't seen it yet, but we'll see.
Yes, you can, Arvind?
Yes.
Robots can have EQ?
Look, there's so many examples. So what is EQ? So why do you feel better as a patient talking to somebody like that? It's patient, it doesn't get angry, it doesn't get upset. A lot of EQ is also about replaying people's emotions back. There's enough examples where it can at least be maybe at a first or second grader level, no, maybe not at an adult level of EQ.
I don't know if they're going to replace culture, collaboration, and all that. That's what keeps me
it's
up at
not
night,
going
Sarah,
to
to
do
be
that.
honest.
So let's watch that. Thomas, what should we watch?
I think we see over the next year, couple of years, new companies building brand new products that are powered by AI. I think that is an area that not a lot of people have talked about. People focus a lot on productivity, improving processes within companies, but there are a number of companies actually building products actually powered by AI, and I personally think that'll be a new generation of technology.
Like what? Do you have an example? A cool one?
You can think of a system which, think of it as having a small brain inside of it that's helping, for example, kids learn. We've had a company working with us to take a model and put it into a system which kids can interact with, so that even when they're on their own, they can learn and take lessons and do whatever kids are supposed to be doing that they may not get attention to in certain families. So that's an example of something that is a really different thing than you could do before, because without having the capabilities of this technology, you would not be able to do that.
I'd like to program my kids to learn. Arvind?
Look, the one I'm most excited about is paperwork reduction. If you think about the bureaucratic delays that are there in many, many processes, not just government, but also corporate, that's sort of the whole bureaucracy. I'm most excited by, can you take that 3, 4, 5% friction out by leveraging AI behind the scenes, both for this thing? That's the positive. You said danger. I think the biggest danger is misinformation. I think a lot of the other dangers are there, but they're like maybe way out in the future. Misinformation, for which there are some techniques that have been talked about, could be there, is the danger to worry about, because that's not the people who want to follow the law. That's the people who are outside the law, and now they're going to use it for misinformation.
Yeah, I would just say that I've given some use cases. Technology doesn't save lives, people save lives. What I'm optimistic about is the capacity and the capability of all these tools. By the way, whether it's an open model that Arvind talked about or closed large language model, it's also worth mentioning that it's good that the US government did the CHIPS Act. $39 billion is being used to bring more special nanometer production here to make us more self-sufficient over time. I'm optimistic about how people can use this technology to provide improved response times and an umbrella of protection over us to make us safer, to make large cities safer, to reduce crime, to protect kids in school, and around public safety and national security. That gives me the greatest hope.
Are we going to have a problem trusting? I mean, the election is in November. We have a few more months. Is this a big worry yet?
Look, I mean, people
brought
have
up
used
misinformation.
People have used misinformation forever. I mean, like when newspapers first came out, people were worried it would print wrong information. That's why the soapbox system. When television first came out, then we said we must give equal airtime to both candidates. I think this is just the next one. Yeah, it goes faster. It doesn't create the issue. It can be used to amplify the issue.
So we trust the election fully when it
No,
comes to
I think that we should
generative AI content.
I think we should make sure that there are people putting out other things, and authoritative sources, maybe like CNBC, should be more heard than others.
Always accurate. Thank you very much, guys. I just had to sneak in the politics at the end because of where we are. We went deep. That was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.